Welcome. It's an interesting day today as I welcome you to the Economic Times on this platform. I'm Ashutosh Sinha. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation on a subject that is among the most talked about today, particularly for businesses, because it is redefining the business landscape. Today, Mahindra Logistics presents the Economic Times Supply Chain Dialogue, and we are going to be talking about emerging technology interventions in supply chain. The changes in supply chain have been happening for over a last decade or so, but most noticeably in the last 2 years as the pandemic set in and businesses felt the need to rework the fundamentals. It has presented the unprecedented opportunity to reshape tomorrow's business landscape, and the best minds and technologies from around the world are trying to solve the problem. Technology clearly is the pillar on which tomorrow's supply chain is being built, is being thought of, is being designed. So tomorrow's businesses, as I mentioned, are being built on the pillars of sustainability, data insights, and outlook into the future, and with innovative tools. But that is just the beginning, and the detailing of the subject is best done by the experts. Real-time data for the handling of goods and materials at any stage of the supply chain is critical for the effective management of the entire supply chain. That visibility of the supply chain lets companies assure consumers that the products they're buying has a certain lineage to it, comes from sources which are verified and more. So if you're a supply chain or a technology solutions professional, you would not want to miss this conversation and perhaps even take notes. We'd love if you have any questions and would like one of the experts to answer those questions. So please keep those questions coming. And since I spoke of the experts, who should do more of the talking, not me, let me first introduce you to them. Mr. Satish Patil, he's Chief Digital Officer, Larsen and Toubro. Mr. Sanjeev Mehta, Head of eCommerce, Center of Excellence at Udaan. Mr. Atanu, Group CIO at Biocon. Mr. Ajay Nair, Partner and Leader Supply Chain Transformation at PwC. And Mr. Sreenivas, Pamidimukkala, he's Chief Information Officer at Mahindra Logistics. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking out the time from your busy schedules to join us today. To begin the conversation, let me first request Ajay Nair to set the ball rolling with a context-setting talk. Ajay, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashu. So good afternoon, everyone. I think as Ashu mentioned, it's one of the most talked about subject, supply chain, and as a supply chain professional myself for more than 2.5 decades, it's very exciting to see what's happening in the supply chain space and what are some of the things that are happening, but what is the implication of that on businesses and how are businesses trying to reshape that. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking through, what I see as some of the trends in around the world, which impact supply chain substantially. Obviously, many of these would be stuff which is, you would have experienced. But one of the things that we have observed is, the disruptions. Everybody has seen and heard the word. I think one of the change that we see is disruptions in terms of the supply chain, but the disruptions are at the speed and scale, which has never been seen before. And more importantly, the speed, scale, and the frequency. These three things have kind of simply gone substantially, never been seen before kind of is what we are seeing. And the reasons are many. They could be health, climate, geopolitical. There are many reasons why these disruptions are happening. But point is disruptions are happening and they're here to stay. What does those disruptions do? Well, they're driving demand volatility, and they're driving a substantial impact on supply concentration risk. So, was cost and efficiency the model, and service level, used to come number two for any supply chain that we used to look at, and the balance was between these two. Well, now the third part of that whole triangle, which is everything to do with resilience, has come in. And now, adding further to that is the whole focus on ESG. Uh, you know, whether it is how do you manage your emissions, what implication it has from a recycling, social engagement standpoint. To my mind, this one is going to be another big shift, like we're seeing disruptions. The focus that, not just organizations, I see the whole ecosystem, every aspect of the ecosystem, whether it is the people who fund businesses, whether people who run businesses, or eventual consumers, all of them seem to have a substantial focus on this space, and this whole ESG area is going to be the next wave of disruption that we will see in supply chain. Again, consumer preferences are changing rapidly. When you take India or any of the geographies nearby, you'll see that customization of products, services, what the consumer want is changing rapidly. Everything is digitally consumed. The experience has to be great, and everything has to be here and now. Obviously, all of these have very, very substantial implications on the supply chain, on how you kind of, make your product, source your materials to make the product, how do you deliver it to consumers, substantial challenges. Well, the other big trend that I see is talent. Well, all of us experience that, but at the same time, getting talent who understand and can run supply chain with digital capabilities is going to be the next big challenge or the trend that we will need to get right. And again, if that talent is going to be in short supply, then what do we do? That's going to be the ask of this whole model. The emergence of digital, to my mind, it's something which has been there, as Ashu mentioned, for some time now. But I think the impact it has had on supply chain and the way organizations are pulling at it to kind of make use cases which are substantial is, quite high now. So whether it is AI, whether it is cloud, blockchain, 3D, all of these we're seeing use cases which organizations are trying to build out and try and see how they transform their supply chain. So we see supply chains, we're looking towards a vision of what we call as connected and autonomous. And it is about the ecosystem which is connected and autonomous. So it's not the organization by itself, but their suppliers, their customers, consumers, how all of that comes together, and the whole supply chain tries and gets to an autonomous orchestration. So that's the vision. Through that vision, capabilities in how do you build visibility and transparency in supply chain? How do you build sustainability or the ESG aspects in the supply chain? These are critical capabilities. How do you ensure that the entire planning execution works in a very close loop, leveraging digital capabilities? How do you ensure that the supply networks in the ecosystem are completely digitally linked? And all of this while dynamically segmenting consumers and customers so that the supply chain is delivering to them. Obviously, the digital capabilities of AI would be critical in making all this happen. At the same time, the operating model of how do you collaborate with partners, ecosystem partners, and building center of excellences within yourself. These are elements which will help drive towards a connected, self-orchestrated ecosystem or the autonomous supply chain. Clearly, the ones who are leaders in this, in our research, we found that they are seeing benefits. Costs down by 6.8% and revenue up by 7.7% over the last couple of years. So clearly, digital is the way, it is delivering outcomes, and it will help manage the whole disruption and build resilience in organizations. Very quickly, to bring this to life, a couple of examples that we've seen globally. An automotive component manufacturer building out an end-to-end visibility of its supply chain from their suppliers to their plant to their customers, so that if any order from one of their suppliers is not getting delivered at a particular hour, then what's the alternate option? This entire thing has been built out on an autonomous control tower. Another telecom consumer electronics player has converted and built out a warehouse in a box, completely driven through communication technology, so that wherever they go, whichever geography they go, it can be just deployed, and it helps them kind of automate and get this done faster, better. Another organization in the life sciences space, they are leveraging the digital technologies to ensure the whole customer experience. How do you look at weather and the implications of weather on their products and on what is good for the consumer to kind of decide in the agriculture value chain? To do that, hence what products they should make and then they should deliver. Bringing all of this together in a end-to-end closed-loop integrated planning and execution model. Another example is of an industrial machine manufacturer, which is where they've gone out and actually cut down their whole cycle time from 4 days to pretty much 4 hours. Highly agile, flexible manufacturing driven directly by a make to order, which to my mind is really a dream. Again, driven through the latest digital technologies of putting in a QR code, the QR code leading to the end customer ordering, that hitting the supply chain, hitting the manufacturing and driving the whole supply chain. So I think the limited point is that emerging technologies will help solve problems in supply chain. There are many problems in supply chain as we are seeing, and we will see many more coming. I think going down this entire path of leveraging these emerging technologies to deliver on how do you solve supply chain problems and making it resilient while delivering costs and revenues for the organizations is the way forward. Over to you, Ashu.
Okay, thanks for that big picture view there, Ajay Nair. Thanks indeed. And let's now try and open the floor for questions. And two things caught my attention. One about an example that he gave of machine manufacturing, and the other also for pharmaceuticals and pharmaceuticals that you mentioned there, Ajay. So let me first ask Satish Patil for that. What are some of those current technologies that challenges, the technology challenges that are faced by industry, and how can we possibly look to address those challenges?
Thank you, Ashutosh, for inviting me to this forum. Thanks to E.T. Grazel, and I'm honored to be part of this panel discussion. So your question on, from an industry perspective, what are those few technological challenges that we are facing when trying to manage supply chain, right? So, supply chain, I'm going to keep it more focused to the industry that I'm working with, so that it becomes more contextual. And I'm sure from industry to industry, the experiences and the challenges will vary. So the first technological challenge that I come across in managing supply chain is the total cost of ownership, right? So when I plan certain supply from a set of supplier ecosystems, I need to very well know what is my landed cost to be, right? And certain landed cost can be predicted, certain landed cost cannot be predicted because of multiple reasons. So the challenges we have supply chain technologies which will manage the logistics part of it, but then how do we reconcile with the actual fuel consumption, the driving behavior, and the cost that he is carrying while delivering the material? So that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing, and we are trying to merge industrial IoT technology coupled with the logistics solution. So both coupled together, we get what we want when trying to manage the cost of ownership. So that is one technology challenge. Another challenge is if I look at the supply chain and the ecosystem, and if I say technology, the information sharing comes as a part of it, right? If I don't get information from all the suppliers and from all the supply chain players, then I can plan only so much. So the maturity of the players in terms of information sharing and the ecosystem they have to manage technology is varying. So if I try to draw a parallel and a commonalization layer, it comes well below the bar of information that I need to really manage the supply chain effectively.
Mhm.
And the third thing is the technology is resilient, but the supply chains enabling them are not resilient, right? That's what even Ajay hinted upon, the resilient supply chain. And that effect I can also see on the technology. Technology plans very well, but if the players are unable to cope up with the supply and demand, or for any other reasons, like in the past 2 years, we are grappling with the pandemic. So people are still coming out from the woods and trying to be agile in the supply chains, right? So how do we marry that as well? So I think these are the few challenges, as well as there are technologies which try to complement them. But this is what we are facing from an industry perspective.
Sure. So very valid point about your industry, Satish. There. Let me go to Atanu, and that is one industry that is unique. Some of the regulation is emerging and still being discussed. Atanu, what are the biggest challenges you face in the industry when we're talking of pharmaceuticals and healthcare?
Uh, so the SKU size in pharmaceutical is small. It is expensive, and unlike many other industry, it has an expiry date. And many of these pharmaceutical products have to be kept in a specified temperature, cold chain. So you have these SKU sizes being small, volume-wise, size-wise. It has to be widely distributed globally. Like, for example, in India, it might be required in various corners of the country. And at the same time, it has an expiry date, as well as it has to be maintained at a low temperature. And the more the product becomes complex, the conditions are more. So the agility in which the distribution has to happen is extremely important. And production capacities and raw materials will be at shortage always, because the same raw material can be used to make so many products. And there are a huge volume of products and medicines which are made. So you can't make all of that. Production capacity is constrained. So which product to make, for what expiry date, how do you distribute it? Might be the medicine is available in Guwahati, but it is required in Nagpur, and it is for a particular expiry date. So it might actually get expired, and some other patient is not serviced. So the ability to sense demand, where exactly it is there, and the ability to distribute to the point is the biggest challenge. How can you do it so that expired stock doesn't happen at the same time you are able to service a patient? Many times you will hear, even in the COVID times, there were situations where remdesivir was required for a patient here, it is getting wasted somewhere else, and it has not been rightly distributed. Second thing is, when we use demand forecasting techniques, but in scenarios like the second wave of COVID, in month of March, there was only 200 vials of a drug called itolizumab and tocilizumab, which was used in a week. Roche Cipla used to import it from Roche abroad, and Biocon used to manufacture the same drug. The demand was only 200 vials. In April, it was 7,000 vials. So no amount of demand forecasting can help solve that problem, and those type of things will happen. So that is where the agility in manufacturing, your supply chain responsiveness to tackle that is important. So how agile is your manufacturing and distribution to make that happen? And actually the industry was able to cope up. Though raw material supplies from China and other countries were constrained, but still the manufacturing capability was able to do from 200 to 7,000 and distribute it. So I think the challenges are, at a small volume, small SKU sizes, distributing, managing expiry dates. How do you scale up production, scale down production, swap one product to another product? When you were requiring COVID medicines, you didn't require that many amount of might be people were they had less requirement of less accidents, so there was less requirement of drugs for the for the legs or the bones breaking and those type of things. So you had to swap products in the manufacturing line. That flexibility in the supply chain, these are the important things. Apart from that, again, during the COVID times, because everybody has experienced it, there were spurious products getting distributed. So instead of remdesivir, water was getting given or something else. So how do you understand the authenticity of the product and whether the product has been throughout the supply chain maintained at the right temperature conditions? So these are the challenges, and luckily technology is available today which can help people address these things.
Okay, since you mentioned about technology, can you just mention a few lines about the emerging regulation which is trying to build a case of using more of technology and ensure that traceability and some of those factors are addressed as well? Atanu.
Yeah, so different countries have come up with regulations where the entire value chain of the ingredients which goes to the product and the product's distribution can be traced back. So the traceability of raw materials and the final product to the customer, to the patient, that is what the regulation says in different countries. Might not be to the end patient, but at least till the distributor or the retailer. So track and trace, different countries have come out with serialization requirements, which which the pharma companies have to adhere to. And that helps companies to trace back the authenticity, and even the consumer or the patient can understand whether my product is genuine.
Okay. Thanks, Atanu, for that input. Let me go across to Sanjeev Mehta and try and understand from what are some of those, particularly for the tech-focused professionals who are listening right now and who may want to even refer to this conversation. What are some of those tech stacks, Sanjeev, that may help in the enablement for some of these technology inputs when you're imagining tomorrow's supply chain?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me here, and great to be a part of the esteemed panel. Look, I think before we get into specifics on the technology, right, I think there are a few things which at least I would like to talk about from at least the e-commerce perspective. So obviously, e-commerce is a lot of people, this is here to stay, right? But what's also coming with e-commerce is a lot of customer choices. Customer wants to adopt, but he also has a lot of options. The second thing obviously is because customer has options with limited loyalty. So from that perspective, the fundamentals have to be solved, and obviously technology has to help in solving for those fundamentals on cost, experience, and so on. I think one another trend which is kind of shaping the way technology is influencing supply chains is the whole compute power becoming easier and continuing to become easier, right? So think of it, in the past, a real-time slotted delivery routing problem, which kind of took 2 days on a linear programming solver, are now solvable in real time. Obviously, there is a lot of focus on sustainability, on green supply chain. And I think there is a new world which is around safety, which has kind of assumed a very different meaning during the pandemic, right? So any technology footprint has to call for these combination of things, right? Customer preferences, his lack of stickiness, but he wanting everything in demand, everything from the platform, solving for cost, solving for customer centricity, being able to solve some of these real-time problems, in a sustainable and a green manner, in a safe manner for the customer. I would not want to talk about some buzzwords like machine learning, big data, blockchain, image processing. I think pretty much everything we can think about is used in the technology paradigm needed for the new supply chains. Similarly, in terms of the functional coverage, everything from forecasting, WMS, sorting, last mile routing, sequencing, I think pretty much it's a par here. And along with that, whatever basic things you need, like on employee safety, profiling, man-machine integration, I think those are basics. Here are a few things that I would like to talk about in the outcomes of the technology which they need to solve for. So one thing is, I think a lot of our supply chain has evolved from very core manufacturing fundamentals. It's a bit of assembly line, and you would see that footprint inherited in hub and spoke models, right? If you actually see, manufacturing itself has evolved a little bit to job shop from assembly lines. Obviously, the flavor is different in different industries. So one of the first things I think technology needs to solve for is, how do we kind of solve for this dynamicity, the volatility in the supply chain, and try to offer this agility. I'll kind of give you an example, right? In Udaan, we look at the vehicle load profile and try to influence a pricing decision with it. So let's say my vehicle capacity is 800 kgs, I'm at 600 kgs. By giving some pricing margin, I can short circuit my supply chain. Now the question is, your technology stack needs to understand that dynamicity, the potential of end-to-end cost optimization. In some ways, what you're trying to ask your supply chain stack is to breach your marginal cost, right? And that's this kind of decision-making helps you enable that. Second thing is, obviously, it has to be very, very integrated. So integrated view of technology, machine, person, and process. So without using a buzzword again, some kind of a highly integrated microservice view, which encompasses process, operation, and technology. Obviously, you have to take subjectivity out of the execution, right? So a lot of things are dynamics. So how do you make this very easy for last person in the chain? So for example, in a COVID world, a safe delivery, how do you take that subjectivity of decision-making? Is it 6 meters or 2 meters or 1.5 feet? So technology solves for that. I think one of the trends you would also see is a much more common intersection of products, at least in the e-commerce space. So payments, credit, delivery, open box delivery. So how do you kind of abstract your technology stack? How does it, all these common functionalities are abstracted in your technology stack? Closely related to that is a much more inside view, in my humble opinion. See, in the past, we had a very top-down view of technology. I think the world is slightly evolved now. Who would have thought a credit payment behavior is used to drive your delivery performance? So from that perspective, how do you think of very third order, fourth order derivative products, which your technology will give access to? Which also means in this federated digital ecosystem, you need to make sure that your data is published. You don't know which consumer might need access to this data. So much more federated, but everybody needs to kind of publish whatever data points they have. Obviously, it has to be very easily pluggable into the external ecosystems, because you will be working with suppliers, third-party logistics providers, and your customers. So how do you plug in easily on both the sides and also with by external providers? And at source, it has to kind of give access to your footprint, like a carbon footprint, and also adoption of some of the new technologies like guided vehicles which solve for this footprint. So these are some of the core outcomes on the technology side. As I said, I can give all the buzzwords, but to me, the focus areas on the outcomes are more important than what exactly technology stack we use. Thank you.
Okay, let me just get Sreenivas in, and then I'll come to Atanu. I must mention Atanu has to leave. Atanu, if you just permit, I can go to once to Sreenivas and then come to you. Is that fine, Atanu? Okay, Okay, I'll just take a couple of minutes. So Atanu has something urgent he has to leave, so which is why. Go to Sreenivas right now. Sreenivas, what could be the building blocks for that digital supply chain ecosystem? How can Indian companies achieve that transformation towards that kind of a digital supply chain?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here for this. Yeah, I think one of the main building blocks is going to be integrated planning and execution, right? So you should have an integrated system and you should have visibility across the integrated system, which is going to be the key, right? You should be able to view what is actually traveling in that supply chain, right? And of course, there are a lot of new innovations that are happening in terms of smart warehousing, where you can actually you don't have to physically do based on technology or handware. You can actually wearables. You can actually track the material real time. That's one of the major stuff that's going to actually pop up, right? And also the important thing is going to be analytics, right? How can I actually get real time KPIs of where is my product, right? So that I think that's going to be the key. Like for the end of the day, you have a lot of these isolated systems talking to each other. End of the day, analytics is something that actually bridge and bring all of them onto one single platform. And how can Indian companies do it? Because there are a lot of, I would say, there's a lot of disruption in the supply chain itself, right? Because if you look at most of the startups, right, everybody, I think majority of them have some product or the other in the supply chain area itself. So that tells there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of disruption that is happening in that space. And the main thing that's going to be the key for any the supply chain organization is going to be, how can I minimize my lead time, right? So nobody expected that, you can get groceries in 10 minutes. That is something new that has actually disrupted the traditional way of actually shopping itself, right? And in 10 minutes your timing has to be precise. Right? In the time, what I meant was you should know how to get there faster, right? So the route optimization is going to be the key, which is again based on technology, right? And also there is a lot of disruption that's going to be the last mile delivery itself. I mean, if you see that's where the customer buying patterns, as somebody said, that their choices are different, right? And they want they want everything to be, the speed is of major essence right now, and you have to be more accurate. I would say the accuracy is going to be the key. When there's a lot of people that actually come in and say I'll do a 10-minute and 15-minute, but if you're not accurate or if you're not precise, then you lose customers very quickly, right? So I think the speed is of essence, but I think this you have to have the continuity. For example, if you don't continue to repeat the same again and again, then you will lose customers very quickly. Like as Sanjeev was mentioning, there are no loyal customers, right? I mean, so I think that is one of the major things where if you want to hook the customers to you, I think there are 2-3 things that you have to do very quickly. Is like, how can I serve the customer, and keeping customer in the center. You have to actually build everything towards it has to be a customer centric rather than what is that you want to do. Customer is the focus, right? How can I actually serve my customer, and how can I actually retain the customer and serve the customer for long term? That's going to be the key. I think these are some of the things that Indian companies have to do to actually adjust to the changes in the supply chain itself.
Okay, let me just go to Atanu there. And Atanu, my question to you is, we're talking of a tomorrow where partnerships will be a key driver for business growth and the way business is being done. So how is industry gearing up for that kind of a technology adoption? Because the larger industry may be able to be ready, but how to partner with those 70 million SMEs, the MSMEs, that can help and that can drive the transformation we're talking about.
A very good question, Ashu. And one of the panelists had mentioned in the beginning that it is ecosystem which has to be improved rather than it is the ecosystem competitiveness or the capability which has to improve for the the whole value chain to be really effective rather than company per se. Yes, the company's improvement of supply chain plays a role, but the whole ecosystem has to improve. And that is where this question of yours makes very much sense. If the whole ecosystem works, then the companies orchestrating or the main companies in that value chain benefits and others also benefit. And I think two things will help here. For the interoperability, because companies will exchange information. So standards has to be set in. And like when I call a product with a particular name, other company calls the same product with a different name, that cannot happen. So there has to be the same language, nomenclature, which needs to be spoken of. So there is going to be the unique identity of each product, which will flow through the complete ecosystem. So those standards have to be developed. Mm-hmm. The second thing is for various documents which moves, invoices from one company moving to the other company, purchase order, advance shipment notifications, they again have to be standardized so that the exchange of information between companies can happen seamlessly. Mm-hmm. The other dimension, so one is the standardization and standard formation. The other dimension is having solutions on the cloud, which the smaller companies can adopt, because they don't have their quick adoption would happen if they get ready-made solutions, customized, which will be working for them, fit for purpose, and they just adopt it. Then quickly we see the whole ecosystem has matured. I think those would be the two things which will help the whole ecosystem, the MSMEs, to mature quickly, and to ensure authenticity of products. And that I'm talking more from a pharma perspective. Mm-hmm. The blockchain type of solutions will ensure that the traceability and authenticity of the products are maintained. And and that can also be available on the cloud. And what I feel is even simple solutions like QR code ensures the authenticity. So just to summarize, it would be standardization of for intercompany transactions, both on materials numbers. I can call atorvastatin a material with some other code. Somebody else calls it with some other code. So there has to be uniformity. And that happens by regulators at a national level. For example, in US, the medicine which I export, others export, everybody has the same code. So it will be called an NDC code. It is the same code which works. It is not there in India and many other countries. So that standardization has to happen. And same thing, documents which are shared, they have to be also standardized. For example, in US, the document exchange happens very automatically, very easily between companies. And the third thing is the cloud-based solutions, which the MSMEs can use.
Okay, Atanu, we'll let you go, but thanks so much for taking out the time at a short notice, and really appreciate you coming in. And we've taken 10, 11 minutes extra from you. So I owe you one. Thank you indeed for being with us at the short notice.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. And we'll catch up with you soon enough. Thank you for being with us. Let's carry on the conversation and now talk. So while we've spoken tech, there is some factor that drives technology, and it's not essentially technology. It is the reality of our everyday being. So Ajay and Nair, give us a sense, keeping the tech and the non-tech realities in mind, and I'm talking of geopolitical issues, trade agreements, and so many other factors. What are the sliver of opportunities that Indian companies have in today's world?
So, Ashok, when we look at, the various, when you look at supply chain as a business by itself, and, that's something which we look at it in the global context. And when I look at it from an India standpoint, I think one of the biggest shifts that we've seen, given the kind of disruptions which have happened, is the model of saying that this concentrated supply model is no longer going to work. So one of the fundamental themes is it is going to move to a resilient, I don't want to call it decentralized, maybe a more better word would be a distributed kind of model, which balances risks for supply chains of organizations. So now what does that mean? It simply means that there are opportunities. China is the behemoth supply model for the world. That's slowly kind of moving away. So opportunities across sectors for organizations to manage supply chains, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is on the raw material side, or when I use raw material, some components moving into a finished product kind of thing. So that part of the value chain, there's a substantial opportunity for Indian organizations or India as a geography to kind of leverage. Obviously, there are various challenges and issues that need to be dealt with, and at the same time, the government schemes have been really, really good in terms of helping drive this, and there is a substantial view on that. The other theme that I see playing out quite strongly is the whole thing of free trade agreements. Very interesting theme, and I think India is signing up free trade agreements with various geographies, and with every geography, I see again another opportunity to see that if I have a free trade agreement signed up with UK or with UAE, what's the kind of opportunities, whether it is about moving some part of the textile manufacturing, which India does, to increase share of that in India, or it's about having a new market access for products which are more consumer oriented in some of these markets. Again, the whole industrial manufacturing area is another opportunity where India stands to gain a large way in these areas. The second set of opportunities, which I, from a supply chain standpoint, I clearly see is that I think as we are making it resilient, there are value chains or supply chains which have got, Atanu would have borne with me on this. We moved the whole API manufacturing into, China, while India was well known for that, and for whatever it's worth, cost drove the decisions. Now we're moving away from that model, and that's coming into India, so that India is seen as a more integrated play in that whole in the whole pharma value chain. So again, opportunities in that space to kind of for organizations to kind of leverage these opportunities to kind of build out new areas. But all in all, across the whole value chain, the ability to I think some of the points some of our co-panelists mentioned about being having the ability to compute data at scale and being able to, in a secure way, get data from ecosystem players will be the big differentiator for organizations in the way they manage their supply chain. It is no longer relevant in terms of saying that I do great demand forecasting in my organization, I do great planning within my capacities of my plant. It doesn't, it's clear now that that's par for the course. Unless you know what's happening with your suppliers, and unless you know what your customers are, what kind of demand is flowing from there on more a real-time basis, and you are being able to balance the whole thing out, most organizations will struggle in their journey forward. So these are some of the opportunities from a supply chain standpoint because of the changes, either regulation, disruptions, which is creating, and some of the tech-related drivers.
Very interesting that you mentioned the data part of it. So Satish, Patil, a behemoth like L&T, and when it works with partners across the ecosystem, how can it leverage that data opportunity from others in the ecosystem? And you can do it at scale, and possibly, some people may be watching the way you've done it, and they might want to replicate it.
Yeah, it's a very deep question, Ashutosh. I mean, data, right? I mean, and in the beginning, I said, there are challenges as well in getting data from the supplier ecosystem itself. So, and I was listening to all the panelists, and the common theme that comes out is how can we make this supply chain resilient in terms of information as well, right? So what we do here is, first of all, we developed the critical success factor for my supply chain from an information perspective, right? You can have tons of information about a particular supply from point A to point B. But for me and for my business, all that information may not be absolute must. There are some critical success factors. So that brings us to some 3 or 4 data points that are absolute must, where my supplier ecosystems has to comply. And you know what? I mean, they knowingly and happily comply because I am responsible only for 3 or 4 information elements and not a plethora of information. So they willingly join the bandwagon. So having said that, say now we get data points from all the suppliers and the supply chain stakeholders as well, players. We have developed a lot of these AI-based, ML-based algorithms where we try to find out the patterns of a supply chain dynamics and the performance. And we start benchmarking it. So it helps in 2 ways. One is it helps us to rationalize the supply chains and help us to improve the overall performance level. And at the same time, it gives us a lot of levers on how to minimize the cost of ownership. So it's I mean, once the data is there, we are using a lot of this cloud computing and even edge computing. We are trying to use it because for the route optimization, someone touched upon it. It's also very crucial for us, especially because we transport heavy material like steel, cement, and these are big trailers. These are not small trucks where even as it can take turns here and there. But for me, knowing the road condition well in advance is very important. So otherwise, it will result in delays, in terms of hours or sometimes days too. So we take these data points and try to use it on a route optimizer and try to give them advanced information on taking the right route, because that would be much faster and a cleaner way to reach to a destination. So that's how we deal with it. So it's a more of a learn, do, plan, do, check, act, right? We keep doing that cycle. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking of one of India's largest companies and how that's what Satish explained there. Now, let me try and get Sanjeev Mehta, because that reach is again something that Sanjeev, I'd like to harp upon and talk about it. Your company has more than 3 million small businesses on its platform. Now, that's a massive scale. That's a pretty big one for a company that's about 5 years old only. So what are some of the challenges these member companies face in adopting technology? And I'm talking broadly the ones related to supply chain, and then integrating it into their respective businesses. And we're talking of all kinds of places across India.
No, thanks. A very interesting question, right? No, first, I think, yes, the number is big, but I think what you have to also appreciate is in this number, you have various varieties of suppliers and buyers.
Correct.
So we have all the big brands on suppliers to very smallest sellers and suppliers. And similarly, various types of buyers from big retail chains to small kirana shops in the corner. I think that's one. Second thing is, I think the both sides are fragmented, the supply and demand side, right? So you have fragmentation on both sides. If you see the B2C e-commerce, traditionally, the supply side is consolidated and the demand side is fragmented. In this side, we had fragmentation on both the sides. I think technology really for them was, it starts with why should. I think that largely got kind of answered by the value from the platform. A lot of those challenges were next level around specifically on the supply chain. So first is, let's talk from a consumer perspective, right? What we would realize is a lot of these guys, while we may think they're not technology savvy, they're very, very business savvy. So one of the things was how to make the technology in the language they understand. I'll give a very simple example. These guys use to their bank statements. So how would you make a customer ledger for their account in a format which they are used to seeing in a bank statement? The second thing was, obviously, while they understand, while they may not understand the implementation logic, they really are interested in the information, for example, where their shipment is. So this axis we actually solved by simplicity. So for example, if you see our order state machine, behind all the complexity, it may probably have 5 or 6 statuses. But for the user, we actually just provided 1 or 2 statuses, which he understands, which are relevant for him. I think the third axis was these guys, because some of them are are new e-commerce adopters. So they wanted communication very clearly from the technology stack. So this we addressed by actually giving a lot of proactive communication. We had to do a lot of calibration in actually fine-tuning what's the right level of communication. But I think largely we indexed ourselves on over-communicating than under-communicating.
Mhm.
The fourth thing is, I think what these guys wanted was a very easy way to resolve on the supply chain. Mera delivery kyun nahi aaya? Mera return kab pickup hoga? So integrated into supply chain stack on the technology side was a very easy resolution. For example, aap photo lo, and you can actually start initiating a return process. You just need to take a photo and say, add 2-3 comments, you can start do that. So how do you do that very easy resolution, not only information, but a workflow to resolution? I think the last thing I want to talk about is, I think it would have been very presumptuous on our part to go with one size fit all approach. So we've tried to kind of do a very, very diffuse landscape on the technology side. So you would see all the way from supplier portal, which is for small suppliers, to very deep API-based payment, ASN, inventory integrations. So these are one of the few things we encountered, and this is we broadly went about. As a side, I think it's about respecting the fact that these guys are very business savvy. So communicating from the technology stack in their language with their used to understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, get the point. So just to remind the viewers who are watching us, who are with us, just please make sure that you put in your questions. Some questions are coming in and we'd like more, and the experts are here to answer some of those questions. So put your best foot forward, and your questions could be answered by one of the experts we're speaking to today. Let's move on and carry on the conversation. So you've heard Sreenivas, from the perspective of L&T and from the perspective of Udaan, and they two both at very different ends of the spectrum. One is a very, the kind of a company, engineering company it is, more than 22 billion in revenues. Again, Udaan, with the kind of scale we're talking, and they talk of Bharat ka e-commerce, while big has its advantages, small has its scale. But in terms of technology adoption, this is my question to you. In terms of technology adoption rather, and security, what are some of the challenges that such operations can face, and how can they be addressed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think both are two extremes of the coin, right? So one is a typical manufacturing company, other one is purely on a platform where a lot of people come in and do the trade, right? And it's like a marketplace. I think the biggest challenge is going to be, any technology adoption, right? If you do too fast, right, then obviously there's a chance of technology failure, right? Because I think we have to look at what actually works for our kind of an industry. I think that's a fundamental thing where everybody has to look at, right? What is that you want to actually target, right? Because the target customers are different for both the industries, right? One versus, on Udaan, you have, like you said, like Sanjeev was mentioning, people know how to use the technology, but you have to cater that how they actually are seeing the information. That's more critical. So it's a customer experience is totally going to be different than in Udaan versus L&T, right? The way the customer actually perceives that. Then other thing is the three things which I think are very critical for any industry is, one is the agility, right? You always have to make sure that you are agile in terms of your tech, right? And the second and the most important one is how reliable is your tech, right? Whether you can scale down, you keep adding new customers, you keep adding new functionality. You just have to have a reliable tech, because that is actually going to actually make a difference, right? And the third one, of course, you have a lot of data that is sitting on your platform or your system. Like, how secure is your data? Security is going to play a critical role, because with so many with I mean, there, no matter how secure, you're still not secure, right? Because there is always something or other coming up in terms of security. So security has to have. So I would say these are my three fundamental pillars for any tech stack that you look at, right? And one is agility, reliability, and security. So these are the three things that I think we should. I think this is the more focus on for any tech platform. This is going to be a more focused point, I would say.
Okay, Ajay, Nair, since we are on that subject, what are some of the issues you would like to highlight for approaching security and the larger picture of cybersecurity in the supply chain network? And it just comes to mind as I speak this, supply chains have been the focus for some of those attacks as well. So how would you approach the tech part of it and also the processes that drive it?
So I think, fundamentally by design, because supply chains operate across multiple different ecosystem partners, their, vulnerability to these attacks are going to be the highest, because the moment there is a break in the chain, everybody is trying to manage their own perimeter of security. It's, that's where the focus is. And the organization, which is at the center of all of this, manages their perimeter. But I think the largest issues in supply chains are going to be how your suppliers are going to deal with it, how the transport service providers are going to deal with it, how the logistics service providers, as you move globally, are going to deal with, how are they going to deal with data, how are their employees going to manage, cybersecurity. These are going to be critical. Obviously, the measures tend to be the same, ensure two-factor authentication, or the whole biometrics. You can put in all those in place. But fundamentally, ensuring the ownership of managing the cybersecurity will lie with whoever is central to the whole value chain. So if there is a value chain and there is a brand in between, which is managing most of the value chain, then the brand will have to take the ownership, because the largest impact is for the brand. A small SME who's or an MSME who's supplying a small part into one of the components, which is and it is a tier 4, tier 3 supplier for a auto major, and some attack happens and some data gets leaked out from there, and that's the end. Or plants a malware there, and there is a product failure. So I think the fundamental thing is, I will come back to the point on how processes to manage cybersecurity of your ecosystem, how that is more super critical than trying to, obviously you look at your own organization, but how do you do that? How do you put those same processes and policies in place? And when you look at your tech stack, please, this is going to be the cybersecurity is going to be the front and center point across. Open source technologies do leverage, but be careful. How that's going to get impacted. As long as you put all the protection in place, it's fine. So to that extent, my view would be that go beyond and put the same processes and policies that you do in your organization. Most organizations are reasonably mature in that space. Get that out to your ecosystem players also.
Okay. Satish, Patil, of all, some of the stuff that we've spoken about, companies will also want to deliver quick results in terms of some of the benchmarking as it's done for the results, against the results, the objectives that you would like to achieve. How would you classify some of those points that can show immediate results? A lot of companies would want that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we adopt here is basically you have one big supply chain, but if you break that supply chain, it results into smaller supply chains, like a supply chain for steel, a supply chain for cement, a supply chain for some other raw material, right? And then again, you further break it up, you can make it regional or players wise. So that is the first step we do, so that we don't want to measure the end-to-end performance of supply chain at L&T level, right? I mean, if we take such a goal, I doubt whether we can quickly come to that result. So what we try to do is, and secondly, if I do that, I won't be able to benchmark at all, right? I mean, if I want to improve the performance. So we go down to that granular level, and we are also conscious that we don't want to over-engineer the granularity and go down the rabbit hole and get nothing. So we limit ourselves to, one or two layers below the broad supply chain, and we start measuring the supply chain performance. And we measure in terms of cost of ownership always, because it's not only the supply cost, but the whole cost of getting goods from point A to the point of consumption. And we have our own parameters to measure the performance, and we measure it either at a commodity level or at a regional level or at a player level. And those data points we try to benchmark, and we use it as a negotiation tool for either information maturity or for the performance maturity of the supplier and the ecosystem in whole. So that's a quick answer to you, Ashutosh.
Okay, get the point. Now let's talk of another. There are more questions coming in, and we'll just go to the questions after I go across to Sreenivas and to Ajay Nair on this one. For India to achieve that transformation, and we're looking at the opportunity. When I say we, Indian companies are looking at the opportunity that the supply chain, the emergence of the digital supply chain gives them. So, Sreenivas, for India to achieve that transformation, how can companies and governments work together?
I think because the supply chain, like as you saw in the last budget, right? So the government put a lot of thrust on a lot of these integrated corridors, right? So where they wanted to create that ecosystem where goods can transfer between one end of the city to another end, right? If you take two extremes, they wanted to have these corridors. They are coming up with the logistics parks, right, where where the supply chain can actually improvise, because that is one of the major thrusts that will put on Make in India program, right, where you want to make in India and so that the product can reach faster to the consumer. So I think there are a lot of, since there are a lot of companies in supply chain itself, they always have to engage with the government, and government also have to probably look at the look at the issues the industry is facing, right? That's how you collaborate with the government. And I think there has been a lot of thrust in this budget. If you have looked at, there are a lot of improvisation. So the major thing is going to be the road transport, because predominantly India being roadways are the highest ones. I think there's a lot of thrust in the budget to improve the road transportation, right? Because most of the smaller truck players, right, they have 2-3 trucks where they want to do a quick turnaround, because it also generates a lot of employment. So the air logistics is probably less unless it is very critical, but it is mostly road transportation. That's where the government is putting a lot of emphasis. And of course, companies are also looking at scaling to that. How can they actually look at locations which are suitable where they can serve the customers faster. So that's why there's some thing called, if you look at e-com last delivery, there are what is called dark stores, right, where they actually come and they make sure they are in a community itself. They're actually residing in an apartment with some space where they can actually support the customer or deliver to the customer at a faster pace. So I think there's always, the companies have to work with the government, and government also has to support the industry, so that future will so the lead times can be reduced, and the customer can be served better. What I feel.
Okay, Ajay Nair, in terms of the best lessons that governments can learn, and this is obviously would be in addition to what Sreenivas is suggesting. What I'm seeking from you is what's more that a government or any government can do. Can states and center work closely together so that the implementation is smarter and more precise to the need of the industry?
I think, one thing is, credit to the governments, they're investing in all the physical infrastructure, and that's happening. But I fundamentally believe that, the digital supply chain means information flow. So what is the government, how can the government invest in ensuring that even in these infrastructure which is getting created, how can the information flow be made more secure, A, and B, first of all, be available? So how does one get information across this whole value chain? Because, getting across ecosystems, individual organizations will do their bit. But when you have a common initiative across driven by the government, that is one thing, can help everybody get that visibility of data, because that's the single largest thing that every organization looking for, visibility of where my product is at any given point. So that's one. The second, I think, is about looking at costs. The fuel, GST, can that entire area be opened up, because in that helps look at costs in a more transparent way. Third, I think the entire, we don't realize that the truck drivers effectively are the backbone of our supply chain in India. Whatever moves within the country, that poor guy is the one which is getting everything across in whatever form and shape. Honestly, individual private organizations do a lot, but as a community, can something be done so that they are trained much better? I would like to see them as pilots rather than being called as truck drivers. Pilots who are taking across this whole, the whole social ecosystem for them. How do they manage and help the organization? It's not just the workmen in the plants. This is the part which is kind of helping moving many things. So these are some of the things that I think that the government and the business can work together more and seek to kind of help this whole journey.
Okay, and I'd probably be failing if I don't ask Sanjeev this question, because Sanjeev, again, to go back to the term that is often used in the context of Udaan, is that Bharat ka e-commerce. Because your company reaches out to the remotest part or some of the remotest parts of the country, how do you see governments working together so that that process can be smoother, that part of supply chain can be technologically integrated with the rest of the country?
I think great question. So I think one of it is obviously the whole infra investment. And I think there's a lot of great work which is happening there, right? I think it's kind of has to be backed by a little bit the whole, the backbone of it, which is the internet and all that pieces, right? Now, I think there's good work there. See, so the beauty of technology today is if you actually have a mobile phone, so you're actually functional, right? And in fact, a lot of our orders already come from Northeast and some of these pieces, which we wouldn't have even thought that they're part of the normal landscape of e-commerce. So I think there's already, I would expect more and more investment on the infra side, right? And obviously the bandwidth penetration and the internet penetration going to grow. And as I said, I think it's already at a place where it's no longer a barrier. Anything on top of that will help and all that. I think one of the things which will help also is directionally some of the logistics infrastructure moving there. See, today, a lot of the Northeastern and remote supply chain is still catered from the nearest warehouse. Now, traditionally, that's been a barrier. Maybe the barrier is on the mental block on the platform side or the company's side. So how do we kind of create some of the incentives in setting up warehouses there, some of the logistic infrastructure there, which could actually unblock the next level of e-commerce growth?
Okay. So let's also now get to the audience questions. And, it's important that we take their questions because they're the people who are watching, not just watching, they also, some of them are professionals in the industry and related industry. They could be from the supply chain industry. They could be from the technology industry. So here's the first question, comes from Yash Gupta. And his question is something that was mentioned by Ajay, or he's referred to that question. It was mentioned that there is a scarcity of talent. His question is about the skills required for a particular day, but I'd I'd try and address that, or I'd try, Ajay, if you can answer about where exactly do the futures, or what exactly are the future skills that are needed for the industry so that the industry could grow as well and some of the people could get employed here.
So I think there are two broad areas that I would call them. One is, building the technologies that are required by the whole supply chain workforce. That's one big key area where clearly there is, building, deploying those technologies. So clearly, whether it is planning related, whether it is logistics, visibility, control tower related technologies. So each area, has its own set of technology platforms which are there today. Knowing, understanding to kind of deploy those are critical talent, which is completely, in short supply right now. The second I see is more skill sets of learning this while in live operations. So there, I think still it is there, but getting people to learn about, how does a warehouse operate, not in terms of the warehouse processes, but ensuring that the wearable devices work, how, in AGLB works, all of those, learning many of those, because Indian warehousing, other than a few private players who are investing now, it is not really there in terms of the best in class. So that's an area which is going to expand rapidly. So learning about all those technologies of how to run the warehouse operations and the processes within the warehouse, how to manage, transportation networks, the technologies required for that. Those are critical areas. Planning related, which is how do you, in an organization, balance supply and demand? How do you work across ecosystems? So the technology is required for each of these, both in terms of deployment. There is one set of talent, which is people, if anybody focuses on that, and the other one is in live operation, being able to learn that.
Okay. So there's another question, and the gentleman has not put his name. He just calls himself a Zoom user. So Satish Patil, the question I thought was something that needed a little attention. The question goes, what advancement have your company? So he's not just asking it to you, but the reason I put it to you is because L&T as a leader, I would expect them to move ahead first in such things. What advancements have your companies taken to actually concentrate on the means of actual supply? Where does Indian supply chain industry stand in the global market? Satish.
Yeah, I think there are two questions. Where does Indian supply chain stand in terms of global market? And the
what
one is
advancements have your companies taken to concentrate on the means of actual supply?
Yeah, so few advancements definitely, and these are not one time, it's a continuous things we keep doing. One is we are going to now, we have done a program called supplier, right? Now, if I take steel as my supply, of course, I have tier 1 suppliers, but I also go to the tier 2 suppliers to understand the quality of the steel. What are the raw materials that are going into the steel? So going beyond the supplier, at least one layer or one level down, we can control the quality. So that is an advancement we are doing. So there you need a process change, you need as well as a technology change of how do we get that information. Second thing is India is pretty much competitive in terms of supply chain when it comes to raw materials. The Make in India theme and the way we are collaborating with other countries, the free trade agreements, what we spoke, I mean, what Ajay spoke about. So those are all opening up the channels of trying to do a pricing mechanism for lowering the cost of ownership as well. So I think all in all, from advancements perspective, one is, trying to maintain the supplier's quality. Second is, can we have our own supply logistics like trucks or everything, rather than depending on them to suppliers, we go and fetch the material, right? So those kind of mechanisms we're trying to put forward, Ashutosh.
Okay. And another question without the name being given by the user, and maybe Sreenivas, you can come in. How service provider is going to add value? I'm just reading out the question. How service provider is going to add value through technology adoption to service customers in the era of direct digital supply chain or emerging supply chain? Maybe this could be a question of a smaller company which is looking to understand the importance, Sreenivas.
Yeah, so like I said, so as a service provider, that's what I mentioned in the previous stuff, right? So what we need to focus on is like three pillars that I mentioned, right? One is your technology you have to be agile, you have to be reliable, and you have to be secure, right? So when you go to a customer to provide a service, right, the customer expects, they come to us because we are one of the largest 3PLs in the country, right? So what is that how can we add value to the customer, right? So that is what is the differentiator for us. What is that you do different, right, compared to a traditional supply chain? So we have to we have to do some innovation, like we have to make sure that there is optimization that is done on the customer logistics, because they don't understand the entire value chain. We do, because being a provider of solutions, right? So the tech is going to be a biggest differentiator for us, right? And how well we can actually automate, how can we can actually improvise, right, and show visibility across. I think that's going to be a key driver, right, for any service product. Why would anybody want to come to you, right? We have Ajay from PwC, or like you have these companies. Why people have to come to you specifically? So there should be some differentiator that you have to bring to the table, correct? So being an expert in 3PL, so we have to bring the differentiator, and we always have to, like I mentioned before, customer is in the center, and we always have to map the journey of the customer. So that's what is going to make a difference.
Absolutely. Customer at the center of it all, at the heart of the way business is done. Now, another question, and this is a challenge that has been around in recent times, you have read a lot about it. Ajay, Nair, one of the things that often businesses talk, and across several businesses it's impacting, is the shortage of the chips. So that is impacting companies globally. How is that going to be factored in for technology so that it can help, because there are price issues, there's availability issues, and there are far more other issues. How can that be integrated into the decision-making so that it can help the managers? Ajay, if you can go first.
Yeah, I think clearly it's a classical case of, how tech could have been leveraged, and probably we may have had a better. So I think the classical pieces in this is whichever sector was using these chips, one of the standards is to leverage, look at the semiconductor strategy itself to say that how are you sourcing? What is your concentration risk? How do you kind of constantly balance that concentration risk and do that leveraging technology? Because if you are so heavily concentrated in Taiwan as your source and a couple of others, the fact that if you have tie-ups with all the various geographies, ability to constantly model the supply chain and to assess that if one goes down, what is the next possible option? Doing that and trying to then build options and keep those scenarios ready in case of a disruption is the learning. And now, by the way, this is the learning for the semiconductor, but that's the learning even when the pandemic happened and everything was shut down. So doing that scenario at scale, it sounds simplistic, but scenario planning at scale is the struggle for most organizations, because data of your of your suppliers is not available and you don't have the right level of data. So engaging, managing that, building that in with the technology solutions to look at this and determine that how do you kind of build this out. Obviously, that problem on the chip side is not going away easily, given that where we are, and it is going to take time to, get back into whatever form and shape it is in another year or so. But that's what how it could have been managed better.
Very interesting, Satish Patil. We are talking of this is a slightly longer term challenge that the industry is facing. As I mentioned, several industries are facing. There are shorter term shocks that have to be factored in. God forbid something like Ukraine or some issues like that happen. How does that get factored into the planning process and the technology input? How would a large company like L&T approach that challenge?
So Ashutosh, I mean, these challenges, like there are short-term, long-term challenges always in a supply chain, right? I mean, that's a procurement strategies also we factor in as to should I go with a single supplier, monopolistic supplier, or I need to have 3 or 4 best suppliers, etc. But the change that I'm seeing, based on my experience, is till now we were all open to India as a geography, and we were also banking on the word news, but that news was more related to the commercialization, the logistics aspects. For example, if I have to check on the prices of a commodity, I will look at the London Metal Exchange rates and try to benchmark and try to mitigate my risks, right? So everyone does that. Second thing is I would look into the logistics part of it, moving from one country to another country. So we were all going to that similar source of information, and we used to plan our whole supply chain. But now, what I'm seeing lately is after this pandemic, especially, that we need to also factor in for the unknown risk, which is beyond our control, right? So that's where we get into that inventory, right? I mean, how do I plan my inventory? Should I keep it everything at one place, or should I distribute it so that everyone takes a calculated risk? So those strategies now we are trying to put in place as to how can we take care of unknown risks. And I think looking at every geography, the dynamics has become an in thing. We are now asking our procurement specialists to look into that geography, understand the political, socio environment, and plan ahead so that we can factor in or can plan our procurement strategies accordingly. So things are changing, but it's still unknown. It's not that you know everything what's going to happen, but then there are certain strategies evolving, and we need to get more and more information inputs and go beyond the typical information inputs we used to always take for planning supply chain. That's how we are taking it forward right now.
So imagine the procurement teams are now talking geopolitics and international relations and God knows what.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
My God, newer challenges, not just for systems, even for the people who are managing that.
Yeah.
Okay, just about very close to the end of that. Sreenivas, would you like to make any closing remarks in case?
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion. I think we had a wide variety of panelists, right? From biggest manufacturing to a biggest Indian e-commerce to PwC. Of course, Biocon. I think it was a great insights. I think I got. I hope the audience also have enjoyed it. It was nice to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Okay, before we sign off, there's one more question, which I think from Uday Sekar, and that's important in the context of the conversation we're having. And maybe just ask Sanjeev there for an answer to that question. And Sanjeev, you can help with that. What all measures are being taken in warehousing and ensuring real-time deliveries? We had that conversation about, the 10-minute deliveries that are coming. Sanjeev, would you like to just make a point there?
Yeah, I think great question. I think largely it's got to do with understanding the physics of the problem and ensuring you communicate. So for example, at the core of it, let's say, and I'm picking it up 10-minute delivery. you would kind of break a 10-minute delivery into a very real-time understanding of how much would it take to deliver. Let's say that number is 7 minutes based on traffic conditions, based on the location, based on the ship from inventory where you replicated. That information you would kind of feed back into the warehouse and say, hey, you know what? I need to pick in the next 2-3 minutes so that I can deliver in the 10 minutes. So the crux is real-time orchestration, leveraging a lot of address services, a lot of location services, leveraging your inventory positions in the warehouse, which have to be near accurate, and leveraging your physics of the warehouse. Can I do it a delivery in 3 minutes? If I have a huge 50,000 square feet warehouse, I probably am not able to do the picking in. So how do you connect all this physics, what I call man, the physics, and the machine, and convert it back to the digital ecosystem to do a real-time orchestration? I can go into as many details you like, but I think that's the summary of how you would do it. And,
Okay.
and we do that as well. So yeah.
Okay, so very interesting. Now, because I spoke to you, Sanjeev, so imagine in remote geographies, this physics being converted into reality. That could be a big opportunity and a challenge for, I would imagine, supply chains of tomorrow. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us on this conversation. Thanks indeed. Atanu's not here, but I'd like to thank him as well for joining us all for this conversation. Thank you indeed for being with us on today's conversation. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.